All right, so it's been over 30 days since I've gotten my hands on the DJI FPV drone. So has my opinion of this changed? I was pretty hard on this when it first came out, but after using it for a little bit, I think I understand a little bit better what this can be really used for, why beginners are gonna flock to this, and why it's really not so bad for beginners. So this is my full 30-day unfiltered, unbiased review. Let's get started.
All the crazy shit I did tonight, those will be the best memories. I just wanna let it go for the night. That would be the best therapy for me. All the crazy shit I did tonight, those will be the best memories. I just wanna let it go for the night. That would be the best therapy for me. Hey, hey, yeah. Hey, hey, yeah. All the crazy shit I did tonight, those will be the best memories. I just wanna let it go for the night.
What's good, everybody? Ken here. You're watching OriginaldoBo, and today's video we're going to focus on the FPV drone 30 days later. So I've had this thing for 30 days since March 3rd or March 5th. I've had it, and I've gotten a chance to put it through its paces. And when I first initially flew this, I had some really strong opinions on it, which I think some of them were founded, some of them were speaking from prior FPV experience, and then some of them, I let just this product sort of, cloud my judgment. So I want to clear those up and give you my final thoughts on this, because like I said, it's been 30 days, so people are probably still curious on whether or not they should buy that. So let's sort of clear some of the things up. Let's go ahead and just jump right into it by talking about the build quality. So I think build quality is really important to discuss because this is an FPV drone first and foremost, and people are going to want to know, well, how can this thing survive taking a hit? And the reality is it really can't survive a heavy hit. Now, I will tell you, I have crashed this drone. I have crashed it. And matter of fact, maybe you can see some of the battle scars. So if you look right here, just underneath the motor, I actually flipped over. I caught this right side. You can sort of see where it's sort of peeling back a little bit. I crashed this onto concrete and it held up pretty reasonable, actually. Really, the biggest weakness with the FPV drone is going to be in the form of the props. The props are really brittle. Anytime you get really down low into the blades of grass or even next to a tree or twigs or anything, it's going to damage these props, which sort of sucks, but they're 15 bucks a piece. You think for that price, they would be a little bit more durable, but that's something you're going to want to keep in mind. Definitely get yourself some spare props with this. If you take a heavy hit, you are going to break an arm. You may even smash up this front. I've seen some absolute horror stories, but the reality is 90% of the time that is going to be pilot error when you damage this. That means you crashed. That means you were in manual mode and you were not being careful. That's why you're going to end up breaking this. It's fragile. It's just as fragile as a Mavic 2 Pro or a Mavic Air 2. Now, if you do plan to fly this in sport mode or normal mode, there's probably zero danger for breaking this whatsoever. I think you're going to have a really good time with this. And you don't have to put it in manual mode. I think a lot of people think they have to put this in manual mode because their favorite creator flies in manual. I'm gonna do the same thing. Don't emulate what you see. Go at your own speed. And I think that this will be a great experience for you. So, for a beginner, I think this works great until you make that first mistake. Then it's probably gonna be a bad day. So build quality is just that. Now, I did go ahead and make some things to help mitigate some of the issues that I was having specifically. One of the issues I was having was these front feet were tearing when I was taking off. Now, when I take off in manual, and what tends to happen is these front feet tend to drag. Again, I'm used to that when I fly my FPV drones. They'll drag, and that's perfectly fine. So because of that, I went ahead and put these feet on here, and that just keeps that really soft TPU plastic underneath there from tearing up any further and having me to replace these right here. The back here, I went ahead and did put the battery condom on, as Kelly coined it, because this helps protect those rear antennas and also keeps the bottom side of this battery from taking some brunt force impacts, which could potentially break it. So That's the reason why I have this here. It also works, you know, as a good way of telling me what battery is which. I keep these on, I keep one on each of my batteries, so I always know which battery I'm actually using. But all in all, yeah, my build is actually pretty good, and that's with 2 minor crashes on concrete, and it's looking pretty good. I did go ahead and paint the shell because it did get pretty scuffed up. I just, you know, hydro dipped it. I sort of got like this red, white, and blue theme going on, which I think looks actually pretty cool. All right, let's talk about the battery life, because when you talk about battery life, you're gonna get what DJI claims you can get, and then you're gonna get your actual flight time. This is gonna be a short topic because the battery life for me has been as follows. In full manual mode, flying as hard as I possibly can, balls to the wall, I'm getting about 12 to 13 minutes of manual flight. Now in manual flight, if I get too far away, the drone actually knows how much power I'm gonna need to make it back, and it will kick me out of manual mode to preserve that battery life. There's no way to turn that off. There's no way to tune what that level is that it decides that it's got to kick you out, unfortunately. Some say it's 30%, but I've seen it do it at 20%. I've seen it do it at 40%. It all depends on how far away you are flying from the quad itself. So something to keep in mind. Now, if I'm just kicking around in sport mode, I can get about 16 minutes of flight. Now, DJI claims that this battery can get a full 20 minutes of flight. Thus far, I haven't seen 20 minutes of flight out of this. However, the battery flight times are better than what I get out of my quads that I build. My drones, I'm getting about 6 minutes of manual flight, which I think is great for, you know, what I'm flying. But with this, I expected a little bit better. Would I say that the battery life is disappointing? I don't think it's necessarily disappointing. It's just not as expected. I guess that would be the best, but it's better than what I'm used to. For somebody coming from a Mavic or something, you may be disappointed with the flight times, but just know that if you had an FPV quad that you built, you're probably gonna see 5.5 to 6 minutes of flight. So this is definitely a vast improvement, but it's also at the cost of a more expensive battery. These batteries aren't cheap, and you're gonna need at least 3 of them if you wanna have a relatively good experience with the FPV drone. That's what I recommend, 3 batteries. So something to consider. The nice thing about these batteries are they take all the guesswork out of charging for you. I don't have a fear when I charge these. When I charge my LiPos, I'm always watching those batteries like a hawk. And I'm not telling you to charge these unattended. I'm just saying that the fear of these exploding on you are not as great as plugging these into a LiPo charger and having to sit there and monitor these cells and make sure everything's even. This does the technology inside of it, so it's a smart battery. So it's a little bit more efficient. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily safer. It makes me feel better. Fuck, it makes me feel better. So I don't give a shit. It makes me feel better. So that's the battery. Yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about the flight characteristics. Okay, so flight characteristics are really important. This is gonna be how the drone interacts with your stick inputs. And a lot of people claim that this quad is very heavy. And for the most part, it is a heavier than normal FPV drone. But with that said, it's not much more heavier than, you know, your heaviest freestyle rig. The biggest problem is that the motors on this are underpowered, and that is noticeable when you are trying to achieve certain maneuvers. A lot of people ask me, what is prop wash? What is the prop wash? Well, the best way I can describe what I'm feeling is a vibration in this drone. And this vibration occurs when I'm coming out of something, out of a move. Let's say I'm doing a split S and I'm coming down, I'm at 0 throttle. And at the bottom here, I'm getting ready to get back on the throttle. Well, at that moment of getting back on the throttle, there is like a shudder in the props. I can't explain it other than it feels like a shudder. And it's just because, again, for me, the motors are underpowered and it's got to move all this mass, and it's going to create that vibration, unfortunately. That's just something that I've learned to deal with this. I know with this quad specifically, I have to get back on the throttle a little bit sooner. I can't wait as long. So you just have to anticipate your maneuvers a little bit more readily. And if you can do that, you're going to have a great experience. Overall, it does fly pretty damn smooth. I will give it that. I have my rates set a little faster, and for me, I feel like the faster rates allow me to be a little bit more agile. The rates are not going to make you fly smoother, so keep that in mind. DJI still needs to push out some firmware updates to make this thing fly a little bit smoother. I know they can do a little bit more with this tune. It's just whether or not they will actually push out an update to fix some of the minor things that other pilots are noticing with this. But all in all, I would give this probably a low B as far as tune goes and like how it performs. I would give it like a B minus, I guess. At the very least, a high C. the way it performs. But it's something that I think that they will be able to fix in the near future. But again, a normal person is going to be using this more for cinematic. So because you're using it for cinematic, you're not going to be making a lot of those really jolting, jarring maneuvers that would bring out the worst in this drone. So keep that in mind too. All right, let's talk about the camera, because the camera for me is a hot topic. The camera on this thing, I wouldn't say it's trash. It just needs work. And I feel like that's the story of this review, is that this is an unfinished product. It's version number 1, but it's not finished. The camera dynamic range in auto is really atrocious. A lot of times it completely crushes the shadows while exposing properly for the highlights, which is great. But if you lose all the detail into the ground areas and the darker spots, then what's the point? If you fly in the manual camera settings, it's great, but it's not easy to adjust those on the fly if you need to. So if you're in a situation where your exposure values are often changing, flying in manual on the camera may be a little bit daunting, but that's one good way to fix the dynamic range issue on the camera. Also, ND filters do help, but they need to address the auto exposure and try to get a better balance between highlight and shadow. I also feel like the camera is a little bit over sharpened. It would be nice to see settings to sort of fix that to where it's not as sharp. It would just make for a much more pleasing natural image. And then the last thing is, when you are flying in D-Cinelike, the D-Cinelike feed is actually back to your goggles, which means that you have a complete and utter lack of contrast back to your HD feed, which can pose a problem, unfortunately, especially if you are in certain areas in which there is, trees, shrubs, whatever it may be, that could potentially cause you to go down. Those are issues. So those are things that do need to be rectified. And again, it's going to take a firmware update for DJI to push it. That's why you see people putting a GoPro on top of these. It's because they aren't quite happy with this HD camera, and they're willing to sacrifice performance for a better video, which is silly because this thing can have a great camera. It's just DJI does need to fix this. Some nice notable things that I did find in there is they do have an ability to crop out the props. So there's a image distortion correction. You turn that on, you no longer get props in your shot, which I think is pretty cool. ND filters do help keep the props out of the shot. But all in all, I find the field of view works great. The 4K 60 looks really good for the most part. I just think they can make it a little bit better. The lack of 30 frames per second is a little disappointing. I like to film in 30. So lately I've just been taking 30, dropping it, or 60, dropping it into a 30. But that can sometimes cause some sort of stuttering in your timeline. So keep that in mind, that you only have 60 frames per second and 50 frames per second if you're overseas, that is running on the PAL standard. So yeah, all in all, the camera isn't terrible. It's just not great. I think it's going to get better with a firmware update, but we'll have to wait and see if they do that. Let's talk about the radio control here, because this thing is actually really solid. The RC on this for me was super familiar. In flying FPV for about a year and using the Tango 2 for almost 5.5 months, as soon as I picked up this controller, I felt right at home. As a pincher, I feel like this controller does strike a good balance in size, and I don't feel overly cramped, and it's just really well built. My biggest annoyances with this RC is the fact that this scroll wheel here, as a pincher, you can see, my I don't know if it's my index finger or what finger, my ring finger tends to rest on that wheel. And as I am flying, I tend to change the gimbal pitch, which will in turn make the drone go slower or faster, depending on which way you are going with that wheel. So that's a problem, something that I would like to see them correct. Is to maybe make this to where we can lock this in flight. I don't, or remap it entirely, which would be awesome. I guess, for me, I wasn't used to the fact with an RC like this, down and in starts the props if you want to fly in normal or sport mode. And then if you double tap this is going to start your motors in manual mode, which is cool because you sort of have like a pre-arm switch, so you don't accidentally press the arm switch and then disarm your drone, or arm your drone when it shouldn't be armed. So I mean, that is a nice safeguard that they do have. It is a little bit annoying when you first get it. You do have to make it to where your stick drops all the way down, especially if you're going to be flying in manual. This took me the longest to do. You do have to take these back plates off and adjust it going back and forth with an Allen key. It took me about a good, 10 minutes or so to really get the stick to be where I wanted it to be. But once it's there, it's done. You don't have to worry about it again. They do have the lanyard holder on here, which I think is great. I do fly with the lanyard, But something that is missing from this that I think a lot of the Mavic pilots would probably have wanted is some way to mount the phone directly to your RC, which I also think would be a great idea, simply because if you did want to flip your goggles off really quick and fly it back to you and you want to fly line of sight, you'd have some sort of clamp or something to be able to look down at your phone. I think that's the only thing missing. And again, I really speak more on that for the guys that are transitioning from the Mavics, because it would make them feel a little bit more confident knowing that they still have a safeguard in the fact that they can flip their goggles up and see exactly what's happening and not have to worry about a phone in their pocket or something. So that's really my only gripe. And then one small thing is just these little sticks here are a little bit fiddly. I end up leaving them in so often because these little M2 screws are a pain in the ass when I'm in the field to get in. I keep dropping the sticks. A couple of times I've actually dropped this, and then I was on a wild manhunt to try to locate the stick that I dropped in the grass. So I wish that was a little bit less fiddly, but it is what it is. Alrighty, so in conclusion, what do I think of it as a whole? Well, I think that it's nice to have reliability. And I think for the most part, the FPV drone is probably the most reliable FPV drone on the market today. Whether you agree with that statement or not, it's hard to deny the fact that you can buy this ready to fly out of the box for, you know, what is it, $1,200 with goggles, RC. There's a lot of value in that. And when they initially released this, I didn't quite understand the value that you get by getting goggles for a lesser price. You get in the drone, you get in an RC. So you're getting a complete ready to fly kit. And I think that that in itself speaks volumes for who this is really for. Again, those people who've never had a chance to fly FPV, this is what it's for. Now, on the flip side of that coin, it also makes it a little bit dangerous for people because you never flew FPV, you don't know all the rules, and you tend to do stupid things. So I would just say that if you do decide to buy this, try to be as responsible as possible. Stay away from people, stay away from moving traffic, cars, vehicles. Don't flip it into manual mode if you're not ready. There is no shame in flying in sport mode or normal mode. You can stay there for the rest of your life as long as you're happy. But don't force yourself to do things you're just not ready for, because again, at the end of the day, this is an investment, something that you spent your hard-earned money on. And if you wreck it, that shit's on you. That's not on me or anybody else that's, you know, talking about this product. But I think there's a lot of redeeming qualities. It's just, you know, finding what it's really good for. And for me, I love the long range capability and knowing that if I send it, I'm gonna get it back. And chances are I'm gonna get a pretty solid shot. And flying over water here in Florida is a lot less stressful with this drone than it is with my other drones. There's too much that can tend to happen. And at least with this, I have a better chance of making it back to me for the most part. And I use air quotes for the most part because I have had some close calls with this, but it's been honestly really solid. So yeah, there you go. So that's what I think of this after using this for 30 days. I'm pleasantly surprised, actually. Pleasantly surprised. And I wouldn't say I love it, but I don't really hate it. It's got a cool spot in my fleet of drones, and I'll continue flying it, but I still honestly do prefer my custom built quads. Like for me, that is still like what I prefer, and I will still choose those over this any day, but that's just what I'm used to. So maybe your choice, first choice, will be the FPV drone. All right, that's it. There'll be a link in the description below if you're looking to pick one of these up. If not, well, don't buy it. Maybe you build one. And if you want to build one, I'll include a link to my build that I fly every single day. So you can build exactly what I build. So there you go. That's going to do it. And hope you guys enjoyed this video. Stay original.